Hello everybody, I'm Rebecca Keppel. I am super excited to be back on ThermOWeb's YouTube channel today. I have 4 cards for you today featuring the collaboration with Ink Blot Shop, their beautiful stencils and stamps, and let me show you what I'm going to work with today. These are the spaced out greetings. Love these little typeface greetings. They're super sweet. This is the set that's called Funny Faces. You can see you can add these little eyeballs and smiles to lots of things that you have, a die cut or an ink blended shape. This is a 4x6 set that is called Giant Rainbow, and it has some really nice sentiments that are on an arc, which makes it really easy to stamp them above the rainbow. This is the Giant Rainbow stencil, and I'll be using that with ink and with glitter glitz gels on top as well. You can see the rainbow is broken out into 2 pieces, and you also get the masks. And this rainbow in the stencil lines up perfectly with the rainbow and clouds of the stamp set that I showed you before. You can see that the masks fit perfectly on top of those clouds at the bottom. This is the pixel grid mask, and it comes with all these different pixelated hearts, so I'm going to share that as well. When I'm using a stencil like this, I like to use Pixie spray from ThermOWeb. It's a light tack, repositionable adhesive, and especially with a fine stencil like this, it helps to keep that stencil in place. So I'm going to spray a few short bursts all over the back of my stencil. I'm working on my waffle flower water media mat, so on the overspray, I'm going to put an A2 piece of white cardstock. And then once the Pixie spray on the back of the stencil is fully dry, you have to wait until it's fully dry, then I will lay it down on my cardstock. If you don't wait until it's fully dry, you may find some tearing in the paper. If you wait until it's fully dry, it will be able to be used several times before you need to respray. I'm using some Distress Oxide in Salvaged Patina, and I'm using a domed foam blender to blend a circle in the center of the A2 card, and I am going to create a circle of that grid pattern. Absolutely love this. It's a great little spotlight for a card. But the best part is that you can use the little pixelated hearts or this large one as well, and you can line it up with the grid that you've already ink blended there. So now I can put some purple tape around it. I don't want to necessarily spray every little piece of the stencil, so I'm going to mainly use some purple tape to also mask off the portions of the card that I don't want to get glitz on. This is the Rina K Electropop Neon Glitz, and I am going to be using this right on top of that blue grid that we created, and I'm using my stencil pal to get a nice, even, consistent swipe of that Glitz Glitter Gel. So you can see that neon green is absolutely amazing. It is so bright and so much fun. I am going to try to get a nice thin, consistent coverage here so that it A, dries quickly because I'm impatient, and B, you'll still be able to see some of the ink behind it, which I think is really cool. So you really get that bright green color on top. You can see that I'm just moving that stencil pal down again and again to really get that even coverage. Now I'm going to peel off the purple tape and set this aside to dry. You can just see a hint of those blue squares behind it. I'm going to use some of the smaller pixelated hearts with some Distress Oxide in Kitsch Flamingo, and I'm just going to blend them completely. So I haven't actually sprayed this one with the Pixie spray either, and that's okay, although I did realize that I really have to hold those stencils in place when I'm not using my Pixie spray. I'm so used to it helping me out hold the stencils in place that it did slide around on me a bit. I did heat set that because I want to stamp some of those eyes right on the larger heart here, so I am going to use VersaFine ink because it's a pigment ink. That black pigment will sit on top of the ink that we've already ink blended, and you'll be able to see it crisp and clear, especially when you double or sometimes triple stamp it. I'll be honest, I often double stamp or maybe even triple stamp. I'm also going to stamp one of the sentiments from the Spaced Out Greetings stamp set at the bottom of this piece of cardstock. I'm going to double stamp that as well. And then I'm going to cut everything out. First, I am going to heat set it because that VersaFine takes forever and a day to dry. So I just trimmed off the sentiment at the bottom and turned it into a little sentiment strip. And then for the little pixelated hearts, I'm just going to do some basic fussy cutting, leaving a small white edge. I did get some glitz on part of the card that I didn't want it, so I'm using a sand eraser to get it off. Just make sure that glitz is 100% dry before you start trying to sand it away. I got a little bit more down here as well, but that sand eraser really works. I'm going to use some Ultra Bond liquid glue to adhere these little googly eyes, which Tiffany sent along in the Ink Blot Shop package that I received, and I'm going to put those a little dot of glue right on the little pupil of the stamped eye, and I feel like that's the perfect spot for that googly eye to go as well. Now, that little stamp set, you don't need the googly eyes, but I think it adds a really fun touch for this card. I'm going to use some ThermOWeb foam squares, the white ones, so that I can pop up this heart and everything else that I'm putting on the rest of this card so that the green and the blue are in the background. I'm going to pop up that smaller heart as well, and then I'm going to use some nonstick scissors to cut one of those foam squares in half so that I can put two of those halves on the back of my really thin sentiment strip that says love you, and this card is done. So much fun to layer the glitz over the ink and then use all those fun Ink Blot Shop elements. For this next card, I wanted to use the packaging because that backer card to the stamp sets is so cute. It's in this sort of notebook paper look. So I cut it down to about 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm going to ink blend my heart on top of the grid, so I have both stencils on top of each other to create a gridded heart. So I am using purple tape again to hold everything in place because I'm also masking off the bottom of that card there. And now I'm using Distress Oxide ink in Prize Ribbon to create that gridded heart. So I have the grid stencil down first, the little open heart right over it lined up with the grid, and then some purple tape to hold everything in place and mask off the areas I don't want to get anything. And I am using a domed foam blender once again. Once I peel everything off, then you can see that heart. This time I'm going to use the smaller heart kind of off center of that larger heart, and I'm going to use the Gina K Glitter Glitz Gel in silver. I'm just going to use a little spatula this time because I'm just covering up that smaller heart next to the large heart that we ink blended. And again, you can see that the glitz just layers beautifully over the ink, and depending on how thick you apply the application, then you will either see or not see the ink in the back. This time I went for a slightly thicker application to cover up the blue with the silver, and I think that that is such a fun way to use this stencil. You can see a little bit of the blue, but it's just a fun way to use this stencil because it works together so well to create those pixels. Ink Blot Shop has also customized with Let's Get Crafty these awesome Pentel gel pens. Now Pentel makes my favorite white gel pen, so I was excited to try this color. And it is absolutely amazing. I love how smooth it is, and the color is gorgeous. So I am using this pen to use the stencil with the giant rainbow. Also has these tiny hearts. So I'm going to just draw inside the stencil to create these hearts outside the larger heart. I could draw my own hearts, of course, but this is going to keep them completely consistent, top and bottom. Now I'm going to put all my stamps in here. So the look I'm going for is kind of a tween or teen notebook where you have lots of doodles and fun things inside. So I have some of the eyes and mouths and then some of those sentiments as well. I am going to put a little bit of tape runner on a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of cardstock so that I can mat this notebook paper looking card right on top. And I think that that mat really just kind of pulls everything together and keeps the eye in the center of the card where you want it. For this next card, I'm going to use the Giant Rainbow stamp set and stencil. So I'm taking an A2 piece of white cardstock and I'm treating it with anti-static powder tool and then also brushing away the excess. Then I'm going to stamp with VersaFine ink, that pigment ink again, several times with the large rainbow and clouds stamp. So I want to make sure that the whole stamp is wet because I'm going to heat emboss on top of this with clear embossing powder. So I'll pour my clear embossing powder all over the stamped image. This is going to keep the stamped image nice and crisp and clear even if I ink over it, because the embossing powder acts as a resist. So I do heat set that, and then I really let it cool before I move on. I have the rainbow, the first couple of arcs lined up on top of the stamped image, and I'm going to use Distress Oxide ink on each arc to create the color. So first I used Kitsch Flamingo, then I'm using the third arc is going to be Squeeze Lemonade, the fifth is going to be Tumbled Glass. And then you use the second part of the stencil that does the others. This way you don't run into each arc with the color before. So it allows you to do every other, which really helps to keep the lines crisp and clear. So you can see now we have this perfect rainbow, and I'm just going to buff away any of the ink that landed on the heat embossed lines. And when you buff it away, it looks nice and black. This time I am going to use white glitter glitz gel from Gina K, and I am putting on a pretty thick application here. I'm using the cloud part of the stencil, and I'm going to let that dry because then I'm going to cover up the other cloud with white. But you can see how thick it is. It almost gives it lots of texture and some dimension as well. So this is another way to use the glitz with the ink, even though it's not on top or layered. So I just kind of got a little bit on a spot I didn't want. I just moved it away and then let it dry. So I have the sentiment curved on top of the rainbow, and then I also stamped a couple of hearts to complete the card. And I just love the look of the glitz with that texture, dimension, and shine. For the second card, I am going to use the grid background from the Pixel Grid stencil, and I'm just going to swipe different colors of cubed ink in a rainbow over that. Now this turned out a little heavy on the left hand side because these are foam pads and I pressed down. So I did decide to trim it down a little bit more than I normally would, but I got the look that I was going for because I really just wanted to stamp half of the rainbow in a vertical A2 card. So I'm just going to stamp with my large Misty over that rainbow that we created with the pixel background. I'm going to use the sentiment before I put the glitz on this time, and this time I'm using the Iridescent, and I'm going to go for a very thin application so that you can see the difference between the thick cloud and the thin cloud, the white and the iridescent glitz. So I'm using my spatula to really create a thin layer where you'll still be able to see those pixels in rainbow behind the cloud, which I really love. So that layering again is so much fun with the glitz, and you can just see that it adds this little bit of shine and iridescence to that cloud. Now I am going to mat this on top of some black cardstock. Felt like it needed a nice thin black line all around it, so I really am just matting it with just a tiny bit around all edges, and this was an A2 card, so I had to cut it down to make that thin mat. Then I'm going to place that on some white cardstock to complete this card as well. So this was just a couple of ways to use your glitz and your inks on top of each other to create totally different looks and to use those amazing products from Ink Blot Shop. I hope that you will try these techniques out. If you're interested in any of the supplies that I used today, they'll all be linked down below. I want to thank you so much for stopping by. Have a wonderful day.